Hello and welcome to the Swim Brief. We're still spitballing names for this podcast. I'm joined once again by two people that came on a few weeks ago to have a pretty wide-ranging conversation. I'd say the gist of it was a lot about sort of cultural issues within the sport of swimming, stuff that is on the grassroots level. So maybe we're going to call this what grinds my beans. Maybe we're going to call this what were some, actually, I think all the rest of the suggestions were not exactly appropriate for this format. So we'll just stick with what.
Can't we swear here? Like, is this monitored
I don't
by
know
the
that
FCC?
I've been rated,
or?
Yeah, I don't know that I've been rated explicit on Apple Podcasts, and maybe it's because nobody has not enough people listen to go like, hey, there was a swear word again. I had a podcast recently where I was going to swear a lot. And so I have decided you can adopt this practice if you want. I have adopted, instead of normal curse words, I just say Schubert instead, because in my world, invoking the name of Beelzebub himself is sort of a curse word. Anyway, without further explanation, I'm joined by the executive director of Gulf Swimming, Julie Bachman. Julie, how are you?
Good morning. I'm awesome. How are you, Jer?
Surviving the South Texas heat.
You betcha.
Yeah. And the aquatics director of the Minnetonka Public Schools District, former board member of USA Swimming, John Bradley. Do you want me to keep introducing you as a former board member of USA Swimming?
Oh yeah, sure. It's
He's an FBM.
FBM. FBM. That sounds like I'm a furry or something like that.
Heavy on the BM.
Yeah. I was gonna say FBM sounds like something they put on my 3-year-old's notes at the end of daycare. Like, he had an FBM today. We cleaned it up though. It's all right.
Let's not do that.
Okay. So one of the things we want to do here is, and we've very on purpose, we've done very little sort of structuring of what this is. We want to have this sort of be regular and ongoing because there's always stuff to talk about in this realm. And I want to give Julie and John a little bit of an open forum and actually turn it into a conversation a bit with 3 people that are looking at things from a little bit of a different angle. So I'm going to go to Julie first. Julie, what is grinding your beans this week?
What is grinding? Well, I just wanted to, I guess add a little bit to what you were saying.
Sure.
How this started was JB and I having conversations over the course of the last couple of years that we always say, we really should be talking about this with more people.
Yep.
And usually that happens when you go to convention or, you have get-togethers. We obviously haven't been having those as much. Sorry about the dogs.
Yep.
And then, me being a fan of yours and listening to your podcast and me reaching out to you and just noticing that you are awesome and spend quite a bit of time, talking about a lot of the competitive side of the sport, which is necessary and incredibly interesting.
Yeah.
Wells, quit it. I'm sorry. But that I really think this would be a great forum to call out various different issues happening at the grassroots level with our clubs, just business issues, coaching, stressor issues, parent athlete stressor issues, and talking about them, but more importantly, trying to figure out some solutions and providing people with the resources, if they're going through this situation or, maybe learning from what we're talking about or actually recognizing that it's happening to them or their club and then taking, next steps. So yeah, I think we really just want to get into real life.
Yeah, and I thank you for adding that. I mean, I think some of what we've discussed too is that it can sound sometimes when you're talking about this stuff like you're just sort of railing against the powers that be. And part of the conversation we're trying to have is like, stop waiting for some higher authority to fix this for you, because it's not going to happen. which is frustrating to hear, especially like I know I get frustrated when I hear it because I wish it was better than that. But at the same time, if you just spend all your time, sort of railing against that stuff and waiting, right, you're only going to be more frustrated. So we're hoping that by having a discussion about some of this stuff that we can help people to be a bit more proactive, to take steps to affect change within their own local environment. And that, when you reached out to me with that really resonated with me, because I feel like my project right now, as I said on our previous podcast, is I've always offered critiques of what's going on in various levels of leadership within the sport of swimming, specifically U.S. swimming. I've sort of always been, not always, but mostly been outside of that system. And now I'm inside it as a coach. I'm trying to work from the inside a little bit more than I used to. And so I think it's going to be a great learning experience for me as well. John, do you have anything to say before we get into some specific topics?
No, not really. I don't think I'm necessarily wrong or right about a lot of things, but I do think I have perspective. And, I see a lot of people making decisions that tend to lead down the same paths that I've seen before. And so, I think it's good to have these conversations and just to get people thinking about it. I don't know how many solutions I have to offer, but, I think that, as I've gotten older and, I get grayer and this and that, you start to kind of think about, all right, where has all this led to? What was the point of all of this? And I think maybe that's part of what's going on right now is there's a lot of people who are trying to figure out what's the point. And their thoughts and processes of what's best for them versus what's best for their teams aren't necessarily in alignment, and they don't know how to fix it. And I'd like to spend a lot of time talking about that kind of stuff, about how do you, because if we want this to be sustainable, and these careers should be sustainable. I mean, you should be able to have a long career in stable coaching situations if certain things are present. And I don't think anybody is providing guidance right now as to how to get to that point, because it's so fluid. There are so many things that can bubble up and create problems for you. So, how do you navigate that? That's what I'm really interested in, trying to help people who are maybe a little bit younger to get the things that they want out of it, not just the things that they may think they want in the moment. So.
Yeah. And John, I would add, you say like, maybe you don't have that many solutions. And I've heard this as I've been writing and having these sorts of discourses over time. I think one criticism I've heard a lot has been like, well, you don't offer enough solutions. And I take that to heart. I know that many people want solutions, but I would push back on the notion anybody thinks that precludes you from having the discussion, because any good problem solver knows you can't even begin to come up with solutions until you understand what the problem is. And right now we have far too little discussion about and sort of discourse on what the problems are, healthy discourse. There's very few places. This is something that's very frustrating to me, and one of the reasons I like having this podcast. There's very few places to go to have a healthy discourse about our sport. Certainly, I don't think SwimSwam is that place. That seems to be where a tremendous amount of discourse happens. But anonymous comment sections are objectively bad places to have it. So this is a conversation with three people. You know their names. You know where they are. And hopefully that'll lead to a little bit better discussion. All right, Julie, let's get into a more specific topic here. What have you got to lead us off this week?
So, along with what JB was saying, when I feel like, and again, for those that don't know me, I am a total outsider. Yeah. I've been in the sport now on various different levels, but I didn't grow up in swimming. I grew up in sports, but not in swimming. So I'm always looking at things like, what what is going on here? Why do we do this thing? And there is a very specific paradigm for everything that we do. And it's accepted as what's normal. It's accepted as to be what people should aspire to do. And whenever there's an outlier, we squash it like a bug, like, oh my God, we got to kill it. And I don't care if it's competition related. Like a perfect example of that is the way people are freaking out over Michael Andrew and Peter Andrew. And all of us can have any kind of opinion we want about that, but the fervor of comments that are mostly negative is similar to the last podcast that we were on. We were talking about introducing new types of competition. There's fervor and rejection of that as well. And it's, I just think that's something we really need to take a hard look at is how do we lift up the people that are looking at things differently and actually learn from them. When somebody goes off and does something different, I mean, what's awesome about that is someone else is trying it. You're not the one putting your toe in the water. Someone else is doing it. I mean, I think we need to now more than ever just be very open to that. I did get a couple emails after we did our last podcast of people just thanking me that we actually were just talking about something different. And that made me feel better because it's like, you're on this podcast and it's just the three of us and it's like, does anybody really want to listen to this? But I think people appreciate talking about, what can we do to not crush the paradigm. We don't want to crush it. There's benefits to the way we've always done things. How can we add to it? Because when we start adding to it, we're going to start helping, the sport get better, which then essentially is going to help our coaches. It's going to help our athletes. So I know that's a huge topic, but that's kind of where I want to start.
You got to forward those to me because as I told you before we started recording today, I think I run into, I don't know if I've quantified it, but I run into too many situations where I sort of find the door slammed in my face sometimes because of what I write or say here. And like I've said in some previous podcasts and videos, I'm not going to pretend like I just have impervious, thick skin. Like it still bothers me to be in that situation. So I would love to see those because I don't run into enough people that are remotely positive about this. So coaches, I think one of the things you referenced there, we talk about coaches' well-being and, it's a big topic. I feel like it's a thing that gets an editorial maybe once every few months on a swimming website, and there's somebody who's had a personal experience where they were engaged in coaching and they went down a really unhealthy path and they sort of turned it around and they want to be an evangelist for this stuff. But other than that, I mean, I think that it's, and I say this as somebody who's literally a part of his job is the well-being of coaches on my team. There is still, in many situations, a lack of structure around that stuff. So when you think about some of the specific issues that go into the well-being of coaches participating in the sport, I'll go to John, like what are some of the things that sort of bubble up to the forefront for you?
I think, are we talking in terms of careers? Is that where we're at? I mean, I think being happy with what you are, I think is huge. I think not being forced into a certain way of thinking and, being willing to try new things. And if it doesn't work out, knowing that you can always restart. There's a lot a lot of people put a lot of pressure on themselves, I think, to get it right the first time. Yeah. And no matter what we do, there's always going to be benefit. Let's talk about like training kids, for example. No matter what you do, every kid's going to get some benefit physically from what you do in terms of training.
Yeah.
And a lot of people think that you have to do it a certain way. Maybe it's you buy into the energy system idea from her band check or whatever, which any physiologist is going to tell you is total BS. But it's a good way of training people, and it's a good way of organizing kind of how you put your training together in what you do. But the idea that there are specific energy systems that you have to get certain percentages of, and that this is the way to do it, not medically sound, right? And if we want, I'll get my buddy Mike on here, who's a human performance guy at the Mayo Clinic, and he can tell you all about that. That would be a wild discussion. So anyway, you want to have some independent thought. At the same time, you want to have some job security. You can't be this person who's running around trying every new thing or under the sun. So how do you merge those two things and get into a place where you're happy with what you're doing, you're interested and you're innovative, and you're trying to be better all the time? You're controlling the things you can control, right? And I don't think enough people understand how to do that. Or they come to that realization too late that, maybe I don't have to worry about all these kids getting enough sleep. Maybe once I say it and I've documented it, if they choose to do it, that's great. Right. But I don't need to put them to bed, right? Does that make sense?
I don't need to tuck every single one of them in.
Right. But you get some of this control stuff going where it's, I have to control everything. And, I don't know. I wanted to circle back to something that Julie said, though.
Yeah, please.
So earlier when you were talking about it, it was that Peter Andrew, Michael Andrew thing.
Yeah, and I should add, we need to mention Michael Andrew once per podcast just for algorithm reasons, because, it draws more listeners in. And then I can tag the post Michael Andrew, and then you get 50% of people listening.
This is what I've been thinking about this. So if the way Michael Andrew trains would have been put out there by a better salesman, would more people be training like Michael Andrew? Because I think they would. And I think the problem is that the way that Peter Andrew and those around him who endorsed that have promoted this has been off-putting to a lot of people. Mm-hmm. And I think it's a similar argument, and I know I'm crossing the streams here. I think it's a similar argument to vaccine hesitancy, where if it was marketed a certain way, that you could get more people to buy in. I mean, I think this is less of a I hate the way you train and more of a marketing issue where people don't want to try it. I mean, if one of the things that was interesting is there were a number of people who pointed out during the Olympics, so, Ron Aiken does USRPT. And I was thinking to myself, I don't think that your interpretation of what he does, and I don't know how he does it, but whatever he's doing, it's obviously working.
Sure.
But he's talked about that he uses some of those principles in it. And there were a lot of people who I think their ears perked up and were like, maybe this is something I should be looking at, who never would have considered it before because it was coming from a different source.
Yeah.
And I think that...
Guys, can I add on to that really quick? So the other thing that I've noticed about that over the years, and I've known the Andrew family since Michael was 11, just because I was in the Midwest. And they are from another country. Peter and Tina.
Yeah.
And they grew up a lot differently than we did. And they look at things completely different than we did. And I think that's also what was off-putting about it, is that, they don't look different. They don't. They don't, they don't look like they're from, they don't look like,
family.
they don't look like they're from Africa.
Right.
But I can tell you from personal experience that they do think differently, and it's not a bad thing. It's that they came from another country, And so I think the combination of all of that, and this is, I think, adds on to what I think we're essentially trying to say is that if it's different, it's wrong. If it doesn't bark this way, if it doesn't, if the lineup of events at the swim meet don't look like this, then it's a bad thing, and we need to marginalize it instead of doing what JB just said.
Okay, yeah. So let me jump on that, because I think that what we're talking about, it's a lot like technology adoption. I try to look at things outside of swimming a lot to see if there's corollaries or different things that you can look at and say, okay, maybe this is applicable, and this and that. And there's this thing called an adoption curve, which is applied to technology. And basically what it does is it looks like a bell curve, but it's organized into 5 different categories. And then there's a separate line that runs through this curve that has to do with market share. And usually, I'll just kind of go through these. So the first one is like 2.5% of the people who are like your hyper early bleeding edge adopters of technology. That's at 2.5%. That's the Andrews family. Okay. Now they're also innovators because they helped pioneer it, but they bought into this real early, right? Then you've got early adopters, and those are the people who kind of glom onto it. That's about 13.5%. Then you get into the early majority, and once you hit the early majority, usually the technology, it can't be stopped by that point. The new technology will supplant the old technology. And I saw a study about Netflix that was done with this, about how basically once Netflix got their subscription model going, it was inevitable that this was going to take over, right? Problem with these approaches, I think a lot of it has to do with marketing and communication. Again, I go back to this idea of who's the messenger, who's the Pied Piper. Think about that energy systems piece. It's John Urbanchik. Everybody loves John Urbanchik. The guy is amazing, and he's smart, and he's obviously done incredible things in his life that have helped hundreds of people, probably thousands of people.
Yes.
And, when that guy's selling it, you're going to listen, right? But when somebody who you don't know, who has one kid, is selling it, all of a sudden I think a lot of people get really skeptical. And that's okay.
Yeah.
But again, I think they're onto something, but you haven't seen it develop. It's all kind of just, stuck, because I think it's a victim of it's like, again, I go back to the vaccine piece. It's not about the vaccines and their efficacy. We all know they work, right? It's about Anthony Fauci, and he's misled us, or this or that or the other thing. It's about everything but the efficacy of the vaccine.
Right.
So how do you, once you know that good idea is out there, how do you unpack it from maybe the way it was packaged before and repackage it to get it out there, so you get some new people to try it, maybe put their own spin on it, and maybe it's something really good. Yeah.
I think it's really appropriate to bring up Michael Andrew too. I didn't actually bring him up on my last podcast, so that one failed the algorithm. But I do think there's a lot to discuss there at the moment, and it has a lot of applicability to the rest of the sport. I mean, I think to what you're saying, John, there's an aspect to which I almost think of the sport of swimming sometimes can be like that indie band that you really like that then all of a sudden blew up, and the people who are sort of the core fans are very upset at the newcomers to do so. Whenever anything new comes around, like, people seem to be pretty upset instead of going like, oh yeah, come on into the tent of swimming. Like, we got all sorts of things. Like, I hear all the time, like, oh, there's so many ways up the mountain. But then it seems like there's these tiny little insular pieces where people get into this mindset of like, well, the way I'm doing it must be the best way. And anything else that's sort of popular threatens that in a way. And I do think it's absolutely true that the marketing end of it has been really bad, in the sense that it's just, a dad. I mean, that's part I've talked about as well is imagine how upsetting it is to many swim coaches that this guy's being coached by his dad, because pretty much every swim coach I talk to is upset to some extent about a parent coaching their kid. So like here we have an avatar of many of these swim coaches' sort of worst nightmare of a parent, some parent who goes, well, I could handle all my kids' training, and we'll do it this way, but it's be also successful.
But to that point, and I'm just for discussion purposes, not to interrupt you, but it's also not really knowing what you're talking about. I mean, there's an assumption that, and I am not a defender of them, other than if there's false information, I'm going to call it out.
Sure.
But Peter's not just some regular old dad.
Of course not.
I mean, and there's been that perception.
But a lot of coaches see that when they look at him,
but
they think about that's what dad.
Exactly. But that's all they want to see. They don't want to see anything else. And it's like, it goes back to, I was on the phone with, I don't know if you know Herb Schwab, but he's an official in USA Swimming, and he's really involved with governance and knows a lot about what's going on. But anyway, talking to him last night, and we were talking about an issue, and I'm like, why is this so hard? And it literally was just like a swimmer was swimming at one of these national meets this weekend. She's on Texas A&M. She temporarily, for trials, went back to her club, and there's all this issue, like, why is she doing this? And,
right.
And it's like, why can't we figure out how to say yes to things?
Yeah.
Instead of always being like, no, can't do that. Or, hey, that's wrong. Or, no, they shouldn't do it that way. I mean, I think that's, not to get completely off the tangent. I think I brought up Michael Andrew, and now we're really talking about that. And I'm not saying, I just think it's a evidence of this type of behavior that, I mean, it's normal human behavior, but it's like back to what you and I talked about earlier today, Chris. We have to be able to talk about these things, call each other out on the good things we're doing, lift each other up, but also say, hey, we shouldn't be doing that. We shouldn't be, we need to be more open-minded, or let's invite this idea in and not try to marginalize it.
Yeah. And I think the result is we've gotten one of the biggest talents in American swimming is on an island right now. Like the biggest problem, one of the biggest problems you get to the national competitive level is I don't know that there's going to be information going back and forth with Michael and Peter and the rest of the swimming world. And I don't blame Michael and Peter for sort of isolating and not wanting, because I think they get a ton of Schubert about stuff that they don't necessarily deserve. And so like, I don't blame them for sort of just walling things off and being like, well, we're going to be over here doing our thing. Please don't bother us. But I think it's really bad that they're sort of isolated in that position, because some information sharing, there's plenty of people that could help Michael Andrew to finish some of these races better than he is. But I don't see that they're talking to the Andrews, and I don't see that the Andrews are talking to them. And it may seem like we're just talking about one very elite swimmer, but this is sort of a broader systemic problem where the two people who could share information to help each other are both standing in their corner with their arms crossed. Well, like that guy, I don't want to talk to him because,
Yeah, but it didn't have to be that way.
It
didn't have, and here's my, and I'll go back to this marketing thing. We're talking about, the swim coaches get upset because it's a dad. How many swim coaches do you know who are dads who have unbelievable good swimmers who are their own children?
Right.
Most of the swim coaches I know who have kids, their kids are decent swimmers.
Yep.
They're above average.
Yep.
And sometimes you run into a kid like Nick Albiero out of Louisville who almost makes the Olympic team, and his dad is the head coach at Louisville.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the opposite of the Andrews situation, but it's the same thing. Yeah. They have knowledge. They're working with their kid, but Albiero's not vilified. Why is that? Well, because he's probably a little more of a traditional trainer. But if you look at the things that Coach Albiero's done at Louisville, they're incredibly innovative. He is a much different kind of coach. And I think that, again, go back to this messaging piece. It's about messaging and communications. I think that if this were presented as, hey, here's one methodology. Hey, here's another methodology. You can pick the pieces that you think you like, but this is how these guys do it, and this is how these guys do it. And I think that's what somebody like Ron Aiken does, where he doesn't get caught up in, and I'm not speaking for Coach Aiken, I'm just using him as an example. I think that that's where somebody who hears a good idea, they don't care where it's coming from. They just like it's a good idea, and they're willing to try it. And that's the kind of personal confidence that you want in a coach who's willing to say, I'm willing to look at these things. I don't care what the sourcing is, and I can put my own spin on it, and maybe something good comes out of it. That's where we need to get to.
Yeah. You're touching on one of my big points right now, because I've talked about on this podcast is everybody who's read some of the stuff I've written knows that I, for a period, coached absolute to the T, pure USRPT. And I learned a lot from it. I learned a lot about what works and what doesn't work. I feel like I understand the concept. I coach in a high volume program right now. So some people would say that's the opposite. The truth of the matter is the two systems have more in common than anyone wants to admit. And in my opinion, and I don't think this should be a terribly controversial opinion, understanding what works about various methodologies of practice, not just like understanding what works about what you do, but actually understanding about what works that somebody else is doing, just makes you better at what you do. Makes you more flexible, makes you more sort of agile, more able to respond to various situations. Because when I coached USRPT, I had some kids that were floundering, frankly, under my coaching that flourished. And I had some kids that flourished that started floundering. And so it sort of opened my eyes, like, oh, okay, there's something systemic here. Whereas I think a lot of coaching gets into, as I said, you get very sort of isolated, you get insular, you sort of figure out what works for you. And then you get this confirmation bias, because whatever works for you, a certain segment of the people you're coaching, they will do well. And you go, well, those are the people who are doing it right. Instead of thinking like, oh, actually my job as a coach is to make as many people that are, sort of reasonably showing up to what I'm doing, to make it work for as many people as possible, not just like take the ones that are doing well and go, well, see, that these people actually, do the right thing, and that's why they're successful.
Well, and here's another thing about that, because I think this has to do with kind of what Julie, you and I were talking about earlier today. And
ooh, what's that? I don't know what you guys were talking about earlier today.
I think people think that they're successful a lot of times because of the way they train, right? I mean, people think that, oh, it's my style of training, this style of training. What if it has very little to do with the training and it has everything to do with the way you engage and interact with individuals? What if it's the way your personality it infects people in a good way and makes you the person that they want to perform for? Yeah. These coaches who are wildly successful, they generally are incredibly engaging people. They're fun to talk to. They're interesting. They have hobbies. And they're incredibly knowledgeable, and they give of their time, and their athletes respond to that. I think where we run into trouble is when you have people who are kind of the same sorts of people in the same town. And then all of a sudden there's not a good choice, right. Or even worse, you get these kind of battles where people are like, well, you shouldn't leave, my training's the best, you shouldn't leave, my training's the best. And it has nothing to do with the training, it has everything to do with maybe this person's just better at coaching guys than they are girls, and that's why all the guys want to go swimming. I mean, that might just be it,
But is it also the kind of like saying, okay, my system is what works. It's not the swimmers. And not because I still haven't really heard us talk about what the swimmers need. Like there's always this assumption that the coaches know everything. And I'm not saying you guys don't. You guys know a lot. But I see, if my ultimate example is like Coach Krzyzewski, who for years would not do the one and done kid or the 2 years and done kid, and was like, I don't have anything to do with that. That doesn't fit into my system, and had, a few years where he was just floundering. And when he bought into that, it's like, okay, I'm going to go recruit the best kid, and I'm going to actually build an offense around this kid's talents, which is, I think that's really good coaching, and I think, again, it's the last time I'll talk about Michael and Peter, but I know for a fact Michael would not have swam if he had not been brought up and coached by his dad. He had no interest in being on a club. And, we can say, oh, why, or what does this say about him? It doesn't matter. What happened there was no club anywhere that offered what he needed. Yeah. And what he needed was less volume, more intensity. He liked it. He loved to race, right? There are hundreds of thousands of kids out in the United States right now, great athletes that do multiple sports, that if we said to them, hey, we know you like swimming, you do summer swim league, you love to do it, you come and you practice during summer, 3 days a week, 4 days a week, and then you have a meet or 2 meets. What if we can replicate that to some degree in USA Swimming, where you have a different kind of, it's a group of kids like that maybe they're just doing USRPT, or they have their track is a little different, but they are going to meets. We don't vilify them for not swimming 9 million yards a month. We give them opportunity. And I think the best coaches, the best business people in our sport or any sport are constantly trying to figure out how to have more availability to invite more people in. That's the part of, the inclusion part of our sport. People want to look at DEI and say that, it's about race and being open to all. It's like, it's also about just having a lot of different products and opportunities for just this kid over here that's a really great athlete that just wants to swim and have a good time. Like, can we please figure this out?
Yeah, but I think a lot of what you're talking about, like if you get back to the coach stuff and the system, I just see the incentive structure is built heavily towards a coach sort of pounding their chest about the way that they're doing, running their practices or whatever, being special and different. That seems to be that sort of irrational it's not great marketing to be like, well, we feel pretty good about the way we do things here. Obviously it doesn't work for everybody. And, some people may find that they're like, I don't know how well that would work. And I know too, part of, again, we're using our USRPT for a model of talking about other stuff. I think, part of the problem with it is when you sort of apply it to most swimming situations is it's an incredibly expensive, in a way, training methodology. It requires a lot. To do it right, it requires a lot from the coaches and a lot of resources in order to sort of manage and track a lot of the stuff that's going on. So it's been very hard, I think, to apply as written and sort of as evangelize on that side for places. So like we're just business model wise, we are much more incentivized to do something where we can have some more kids in the water, where we don't need to track every single thing that they're doing while they're in the water. And we maybe don't need as many coaches to track that, because I can tell you, one of the reasons I think it works extremely well is that there's one coach and one athlete. If you get to the ratios that most people in swimming clubs are doing on the pool deck, it's almost impossible to run.
Can I tell you a secret?
Yeah, go ahead.
I think that 90% of the athletes in the United States, and more importantly, the people who pay for those athletes to swim in the United States, and the number might even be higher, really don't care about how good the head coach is or the head coach's system or whatever. You know what they care about? They care about getting a weekly email so they know when to get their kid to practice.
Yeah.
They care about knowing that their meet entries are done on time and that it's communicated back to them. They care that their billing is done correctly. They care about customer service. And I think the most successful clubs are the ones who know that piece, prioritize it, and make sure it happens. Because then when you have that piece down, you're going to have a group of happy, content people that then you can really start digging into and trying some different things. People don't want to be around a system that's chaotic. Yeah. They want something that's structured. You walk into a McDonald's, you know what you're going to get. You know that it's going to be this. You know that, in fact, when you go to a McDonald's and you get something that's terrible outside of your McDonald's experience, you generally are surprised because usually there's a standard, right?
Yeah.
I mean, so what's that bottom standard? It's like that with cars. It's like that with car dealerships. You walk into, a Mercedes dealership, you know you're going to get a certain level of service, Yeah. You walk into a Hyundai dealership, and this is a piece that Hyundai has struggled with. The dealership structure is different, and there's no guarantee of a similar experience from dealership to dealership. They struggle with it. That's one of the reasons why they've struggled to penetrate, and the key is even worse. That's a bigger issue for them. This is about customer service. And again, if clubs would just figure that out and prioritize it, I think it would solve a whole lot of problems in American sport for swimming. Because, think about it. How many coaches have put it together and set up their effective lines of communications for kids coming on the team? What do you get when you come on the team? So you join the Wahoos, probably get some welcome pack. You have a couple of parents that help you out, this and that, the other thing. And you guys probably do it pretty well because you've been around forever, and that's what you do. I'm going to be honest with you, Minnetonka, we're not real good at that right now. And that's something I'm looking at.
I don't know that we're that great at that.
But you're obviously doing something right. Yeah. And we're not that, we're not horrible at it. We're just not that great at it. But the problem is that around us, there are some teams that are very good at it. And they take it to us constantly because we are prioritizing the wrong thing.
Yeah.
That's the deal, in my opinion. So,
I thought about it because, again, I keep bringing up these tryouts, but they're the lifeblood of what we're trying to do right now. Last week, we had 70 kids come in for a tryout. And I'll be honest with you, it was extremely chaotic. And I was thinking, as I was engaging in the chaos, I was thinking, like, this is not great from a customer perspective that you sort of come in here and feel like, what the heck is going on? This is your entryway experience into our team. No, we didn't have time. I actually, once I finished, personally, I think I tried out like 30 kids. Kid number 30, I went over and talked to her mom afterwards because I had nobody left to do. 1 through 29, I didn't even say more than a word or two to the parents who are our customers, potential customers, who have brought their kid here to go, hey, is this a good place for my kid to be? And leaving it, I was thinking, like, I don't know exactly how to solve this, but I know this is not ideal from a sort of.
But that's awesome self-reflection. It really is, because part of how you solve it is when somebody signs up for a tryout, you send them an email that says, here's what's going to happen next.
Right.
And might even say, we may not have time to even talk to you at the pool, so don't freak out about it. Literally just calling out. You've had the experience now.
We did do that, so I feel better already.
Okay.
We did do that. We did gather everybody and say, like, hey, afterwards you'll get an email from the team. It'll have details about where we think your kid might fit on the team and what you can sign up for and that kind of stuff. So we do have some of that infrastructure, but it just strikes me even at the moment, because I was watching people in the water, and some of the kids that came in for the tryout, because people are at all ability levels, they were struggling to finish a 50 free. And like, I'm watching them like a hawk, just from a water safety perspective. I don't want to lose sight of somebody that's struggling to get down to the pool. And at the same time, I have people coming up to me say, excuse me, I just have a question about, and I'm like, I can't talk to you. I cannot.
Right.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I cannot speak to you right now.
Yeah. Which in turn can be taken
as,
unfortunately.
Yeah.
That
wouldn't have done it any other way, because it was absolutely the right thing to do in the situation. It just, certainly when I put my business hat on, it's not the world's best customer service.
Well, nobody's the best at it, but that doesn't mean that you can't. So the next time you do a tryout, what's the solution? Okay, 1, you have a lifeguard on deck, and that takes some of the pressure off of you as a coach. 2, you have a parent greeter on deck. That parent says, hey, over here, anybody has any questions? You come talk to me. The coaches are evaluating your kids. Leave them alone. We're going to finish at 5 o'clock. If you want to hang around until then, you want to talk to the coaches, we'll make them available for 20 minutes. Done. And you've learned something, and now you've curated the experience so that it's going to be even better next time.
Yeah.
And that's the piece that I think when we get all wrapped up in all of this stuff about how are we going to train these kids, how are we going to do this, how are we going to do that, and it gets lost. And that's where I think the really successful teams understand you got to be good at kind of everything, and you got to understand what everything is. And that's the hard part.
It's one of the few things that can be controlled.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it right there.
Yeah.
Why would you not control that? You know?
Yeah. And then again, I'm like the poster child for somebody who just didn't have anybody telling them what to expect, and always asking questions, not asking the right questions, thinking the grass was greener someplace else because I just wasn't getting information. It's like, could you please tell me what the process is here? That's all I'm asking. And I think parents deserve that. And I think, I'm an inquisitive person. I don't ask those questions because I want to be you. I ask those because I want to know. And I also want to be a parent that when my kid is frustrated or questioning, I can say with a little bit of confidence, hey, hang in there. This is part of this process, or, this is what your coach is, so that I can be step in step with the coach to make sure that what the coach wants to accomplish is also what my child is hearing at home. And that, how often does that happen? I don't think we hear enough of the good stories. I hear bad stories every single day. I feel the craziest phone calls that you would, we could do a whole podcast on parents that call into the Gulf office with questions.
I can only imagine, Julie.
Okay, for 400, it's like a Jeopardy category.
Right.
So, and it always, 100% of the time, I will call the coach, we'll talk about it, and it's a great opportunity for me to start laying some sort of foundation with that club, just like JB said, like, tell me about what kind of newsletters you send out. Your coach that runs that group, what are their mechanism of communication with the parents? And there never is any. You know what I mean? It's like everybody's trying to like play, hide the Perrier water bottle. Like this is the golden goose. It's like, oh, we're not going to tell you how to get this, but you better listen to me. It's like, I don't know. We're our own worst enemy on that stuff because that is a controllable. It is a controllable to communicate. And there's so many ways you can communicate.
And that's a great idea for a podcast for us to talk about is what are the controllables on a swim club? Yeah. What are the things that you can control, that like the 5 basics that you've got to do? Like Bill Parcells used to have this thing where he said, any team in the NFL can go 8-8 if you do these 7 or 8 things. And he's probably right. It's controlling those things that you can control.
Yeah.
I don't think I've ever seen that applied to swim clubs. So let's do it.
All right, you write them down, John, because I don't know what they are. So you go ahead and write them down. And then,
no, that definitely is a great lead-in for what we can talk about the next time we do this. JB and I can work on that. I think it's an awesome idea.
Yeah.
I would also like to see Julie's pig, which I hear rooting around there. Where is it?
Right.
Let's see your pig. Come on, get your pig.
She's giving the dog a massage right now.
Oh, my God.
Oh, you really do have a pig.
No, that wasn't a euphemism for something. He actually has a pig.
Okay, for people who are listening to the audio version of this, we were actually just shown a pig. The pig was much smaller than the dog it was nuzzling or whatever. I really just thought, I heard the sound in the background, and I really did think it was just a dog that sounded like a pig, but no, it's in fact a pig.
Yeah, this is what you've signed on for, Chris.
Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah.
That's life in Lufkin, Texas, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
It is.
Just running a nature preserve.
It's all part of the Gulf family, baby.
That's right.
Yeah.
No, so I guess we hinted at it at the beginning, and I just sort of want to bring this into a cruise into an end, because I think there's been a nice, healthy conversation about some marketing and some customer service stuff. But the initial topic that I, for a brief moment, thought we were going to talk about, I think relates to this is, I think oftentimes at the intersection of this stuff, you have a coach that just simply, like, their stress level is so high that it presents a barrier to enacting any of this stuff where you go, hey, like, actually this would reduce your stress level. Like, if you sent out this weekly email, it would be much better for you, stress wise, but they're just like, feel like they're sort of running in constant fire emergency mode. So they're just going from place to place, sort of trying to be reactive, and it operates almost as a barrier to them doing some more proactive stuff. And I know I've run into that very many times in my own coaching career, even now where, I have a job here that, frankly, I don't work that many hours in comparison to many swim coaches. I've noticed, in fact, I've gotten pretty strong evidence in the form of some doctor's appointments, that my stress level is extremely high. It's extremely high. I've somehow, despite all my efforts to structure things in a way that wouldn't lead me down that path, somehow inevitably I've ended up as that very stressed swim coach again. So I'm at a bit of a loss, because I as I'm listening to this, I'm thinking like, oh yeah, I don't do that. And then I start thinking about it, and then I'm even more stressed than I was when this conversation goes. And it started, and I think people listening are probably like from a certain perspective thinking like, yeah, that would be great. But like, I gotta make sure I have practice written for tonight. What would you say to that? I'll let either one of you jump in.
I would say it's not about swimming. It's about how you're setting yourself up. Swimming is just the way that stress is manifesting itself. I'd be willing to bet that regardless of what it is you do, that you would have those same stressors in another way. And I think the mistake we make in swimming is that we don't look at the individuals. We try to consolidate it all and, the rigors of the sport or this or that or the other thing, without looking at the inherent mental health of the individual. What you said when you said you went to the doctor, I have been there. I was in the exact same situation about 6 years ago. And I went in and my blood pressure was 280 over 160.
Oh my God.
Which is, as my internist said, when I saw him a few weeks later, his comment was, I've seen I'm not the guy who deals with really high blood pressure. He goes, but that was really high, and I was afraid you were going to stroke out on the table. And I was like, not really doing a whole lot for me right now. Right. But at the same time, when I went in, they gave me a test. It was at the Mayo Clinic, and they had me fill it out. And the score on the test was high enough that they put me at risk of suicidal thoughts, that kind of thing. It was like, you are obviously, you have an incredible level of stress in your life. And that was a real wake-up call, because that was when I made a lot of changes in my life and was able to kind of control those things that I knew would bother me. And I think that, as I'm reading these stories, there was a story on Swim Swam about a coach, a younger coach, who recently took his own life. Incredibly bright coach. Sounds like the guy had an incredibly bright future. I didn't know this person.
Right.
I've read this same story 10 times in the last 3 or 4 years. And I hate it. I hate it, because you know that there were people who were trying to help. You know that, and we're somewhere along the way, we're getting stuck. And how do we help these people before we get to that point? Is it a healthy lifestyle? Is it making time for yourself? What is it that we've got to do to help these people? And again, take the swimming out of it and bring in some mental health professionals who can say, look, these issues get consolidated into a couple of different categories. These are the warning signs. Now from swimming, build out some levers where you can pull when things are getting too crazy, and look at it maybe a little differently. But we got to come up with something, because again, it is an inherently stressful job if you let it get to you. And how do you make it better? And I think that's the key. And
we need to do a better job of supporting each other, not just those people. You know what I mean? Like, it's all of us. And, I don't coach anymore. But I'm around coaches and I'm listening on a daily basis. And I think one of the things that I guess I would feel most proud about is that I have coaches in my LSC that call me to tell me that they're in mental stress and they need help.
Yeah.
And I have resources that I call and hook them up with. And if there's a way to set that up in a more broad, way, I think I love that coaches in the profession are acknowledging and actually admitting. Like, that's something that even 2 years ago, you never heard anybody talking about any of this.
No.
But I think, I think it's, we're all going through it. It's not just this guy over here and this gal over there. It's just various degrees. And then, what's going on. Some people are just in a different place on a given day than somebody else. But, I think we have to start normalizing aspects of our sport where we can consistently be successful, instead of, so that a coach can say, hey, I feel good about myself. I did something. I accomplished this. Look at, I made these kids feel good. Look at, the parents are supporting me. But we've set up all these bars that are just impossible for 98% of our kids to ever achieve, but there's still an expectation. And I think that's really dangerous. And I think we're seeing it in a lot of different places in our sport, not just mental health, but the growth of our sport, the lack of. It's like, this is why we need new and different ideas. And I'll say one more thing. The other thing that's shocking me right now is the number of teams that are looking for coaching help, desperate for help. And, I'm like, oh, you need coaches too? And I'm thinking, what are we actively doing to recruit new coaches into the sport? Ex-swimmers, to tell them, hey, this is something you can, this is a great side hustle. Here's what you can do. We're not helping ourselves.
Yeah.
Well,
and we need to figure that out.
How do we make the most of the resources we have? Again, some of this stuff isn't rocket science. And is there a way that we can bring on, you have the junior coach program, which I think is a good one, where you can have kids that are always in a line of sight. They're never a direct coach, but they can help you. A lot of teams have parents that can help. Why can't you have your parents teach kids how to streamline? Why can't you do it? Get them registered, get them set. And if they're working with you, you've started them down that road. But we've got to take a look at what's available to us. Stop talking about, I need, these coaches with this experience, Nobody has those people. I mean, right. they're all, every business in the United States is struggling finding qualified help. So how are we going to coach them up? How do we coach up the people who are going to help us and make them better? And that's another, but again, turn it around. That's something we should be able to control. Yeah. We can do that.
Yeah. I'll speak to that. I got two stories, and one of them's very relevant to you, Julie. I think, we had a brief conversation about a coach in your LSC that's near and dear to me, Dirk Marshall. I think he is the most incredible coach I've ever seen at taking people from any walk of life and making them useful swim coaches on his team. I would gather that most of the people he hires to work for him have never coached swimming before. They go to work there. He actually has a system for evaluating people to go like, this person would be a good swim coach despite maybe not even despite, if you talk to him for long enough. He's actually looking for people who don't come from the sport of swimming, because at least they might have an open mind, to sort of being like, okay, here's how we're going to teach a streamline here. Here's how we're going to set up our practice here. Here's, so that you won't run into as many sort of preconceived notions about what they're doing. Another example of this I'll give that has always stuck with me is people who follow the blog way back know that I was for a while quite obsessed with a swimmer from the Faroe Islands. This is this little community, sort of semi-independent country, 40,000 people in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean.
That was that girl. I know who you're talking about.
No,
800 and a lot of freeze. Was that who that was?
No, she was from Denmark. Pal Jonsen was the boy who actually made 2 Danish Olympic teams, because they're, as I say, semi-independent. For purposes of Olympic competition, they become part of Denmark, which is sort of how I got looped in to even paying attention. This kid was world class, and there were plenty of pretty good swimmers, no one you would have heard of, coming out of this tiny little place. And I was just fascinated, and I talked to the coach, because the coach, he was training this guy for a while out of a 16 2/3 meter pool. And he's like, I'm the only swim coach, for several hours in this area. So like, how do you manage your team? He's like, parents volunteer. They come down and they all fill like a little specific task and we make it work. I was thinking like, oh shoot. I mean, that guy just had to innovate, because there was no other option. He couldn't hire swim coaches to come in and do the things he needed to do to run a team. So he just figured out a way to make it go.
This is the Schoolhouse Rock piece, Mother Necessity, where would we be? That whole necessity is the mother of invention thing. I don't know who the first guy you're talking about is. Get that guy on here and let's have a conversation. Yeah, let's get him on and let's talk to him. Let's hear about it, because that's the kind of stuff that people need to hear. And not because they have to do it, but to realize that it can be done. And maybe that starts the path, in my opinion. Yeah.
Yeah, and I'll just loop back onto the mental health end of it. I think I do like to be pretty open about that end of it. I've even been open here on this podcast, because I do think, I don't know that it's terribly helpful to me. And part of what I'm struggling with is I think I've figured out very well how to help other people. But I get myself into situations where I can't figure out how to help myself. I mean, I'm still learning from my own brother. I finally had a conversation with him. We weren't that close growing up, but I had a conversation with him a few years ago where he taught me the oxygen mask rule for mental health, which is, when you're on an airplane and the airplane loses oxygen, they tell you put your own mask on first. We were talking about our own childhood, and I was pretty mad at him for withdrawing in certain situations. And he said, well, Chris, what I learned pretty early on, you got to put your own oxygen mask on first. And that's always stuck with me. So that's sort of my piece of advice for people, because I think there's a lot of wonderfully empathetic people out in the sport of swimming who do things for who really help other people. But and that's part of my job that I do here. But like I try to be open with the people that I work with about what I'm working on as well, not only just to set an example, but also so that I give them the opportunity to help me, because people can get siloed into like, oh, I'm the person who helps other people with their mental health. And then It's always stuck with me that I was educated at Penn, and a few years ago, the director of mental health services at Penn died by suicide. And that was, sort of a reminder that sometimes the people who are at the forefront trying to help other people, they're struggling just as mightily as the people they're trying to help. And they can fall into the same traps as the people that they're trying to help. And it is a very sad situation with the coaches. Like John said, I've read far too many of these articles, and I've run into, frankly, too many people who I've seen sort of withdraw, people who are wonderful for the sport of swimming who have seen withdraw from coaching simply because they just go like, it's just too stressful for me to coach, so I'm not going to do it.
Maybe
I'm seeing that too.
But that's they're putting the oxygen mask on.
They are.
And that's a good thing, because in the end, you got to take care of you, right?
Yeah.
Maybe the thing that's frustrating is that we can't find a role for them within the existing sport where they could contribute at a different level, at a level that works for them.
Right.
And I think that's the key to all of it, is figuring out what works for you and what you can do.
Yeah. All right. We're steaming towards the finish here. I'm going to give each of you a chance just to share a final thought, and then I'll put a bow on this. Julie, any final thoughts you want to share this week on what's grinding my gears with JB, and Chris?
Let's see. I think I would love if we could kind of announce, maybe when we'll be back, and then hold JB and I accountable to delivering something. I think this idea of, 5 things that you can do, and maybe there's more than 5, maybe there's less, but I think it's almost framing it in like, we're going to give you some tools that you can implement within your swim club that's going to help reduce your daily stress.
Yeah.
You're going to have a little front end work to get these, different things done and put in place, but then the long-term benefit of it is that your days are going to get easier. I think we can do that. And I think that's what I would like to do.
Yeah.
If you guys are game.
Yeah, I would love to do it. Let's. I'll set the goal that within 3 weeks we'll have that one recorded. This will go up same day. Just for listeners of the podcast, I'll sort of jump ahead to just say I'm going on vacation in a couple of weeks. I am trying to record ahead a bit. We'll see if I'm actually successful in doing that. Part of listening to this operation that is that I do have a whole other job, well, 2 other jobs really, because parenting is its own, of small children especially is its own job, and so we'll see. I'm not willing to hold myself accountable that we'll have this done within 2 weeks, even though I would like to do that. If we can record tomorrow, we definitely will have it done, but I don't know if you guys will be ready. Then maybe we'll have that as a evergreen podcast that will come up while I'm blissfully on vacation in my other home of Denmark.
Cool.
Yeah, John, what else? What you got here towards the finish?
I want to talk about this Australian thing where they picked their Olympic team for the swimming at a higher standard than the Olympic A standard, and how that all panned out for them. Because I think they missed out on some people who could have contributed, and I think that when you look at the Tunisian kid, right, in the 400,
Hafnoui, yeah,
who's from Tunisia, right?
Yep.
Where's that guy in the Australian system? Where's that guy in the American system?
This is your takeaway from our conversation today?
This is his random last thought.
This is like...
Yeah, this is my random. This is my random because...
I didn't know we were doing random. Okay.
Well, no, because I think that it kind of is there, because it shows that there's more than one way to do it, right? I mean, nobody saw that guy coming. And in fact, I mean, it probably took till the 300 in that race, and everybody was like, holy shnikes, this guy in lane 8 is right there, and again, I was talking with my buddy Mike about this, the human performance guy, and he's like, you cast this wide net in sport and you're going to get some people who do crazy things. The marathoner from the United States, what's her name?
The bronze medalist.
Bronze medalist. If I understand correctly, that was only her second marathon.
Yeah.
So how'd that happen? Right. I mean, and we see stuff like this all the time with little kids where they, you have a 10-year-old and they show up at the state meet, they rank like 50th, and the next thing you know, they win the 50 free or they win the 200 free or something like that. Everybody's like, oh my God, this kid's so amazing, blah, blah, blah. When you start seeing that at the international level, it's like, wait a minute, what's going on? And I think that we should be looking a little more at that kind of thing and saying, well, it's not going to happen all the time, but how do we have that, we know that these guys are going to be here, but we got these wild cards and maybe they're there too. And again, looping back, I'd be curious to think about, did the Aussies shoot themselves in the foot by not having more people there who maybe would have bought in and just gone for it and gone bananas. So
I appreciate you bringing that up, and I'm actually going to respond to it as my final point because you're touching on another one of my things. And I think, Julie, I'm going to loop this into sort of even more of a local grassroots swimming perspective. This is near and dear to my heart, and I know Paul, my boss, as well. We come from small swimming countries, and if you look at some of these little countries, they're making, in my opinion, the same mistake that you're referencing in Australia. Like in Denmark, you got to have a FINA A standard. They won't take you to the Olympics with a FINA B standard, even if you're the best person in the country. And the result of that, I think, is that you have a lot of swimmers competing at the Olympics where the big thing that they accomplished was getting there. It's like that kid that just barely made the summer juniors cut. They don't usually swim well at summer juniors, if they put everything into qualifying. And so everything in a lot of these countries becomes about qualifying and not the actual competition that they're qualifying for. And I saw an example of innovation of this in Denmark that I always refer back to. I think that the guy who runs talent development in the country is actually a really smart guy, a very good leader. And we had an incredibly tough standard for sending kids to European juniors, which was sort of like, our top 18 and under competition, although it's not quite 18 and unders for girls in Europe. And we were having very few people because there was sort of no intermediate step from being an age group swimmer up there. So we had very few people come over it. What we did was we created another rung of competition that was like 2% slower than whatever the European junior standard was. And if you made that, you got to go on a trip to the Grand Prix in Stockholm, right? We had, I think the year before we implemented, I think we had 6 kids make the European junior standard. 24 kids made the 2% standard to go to the meet in Stockholm. And the next year, with the standard set at a similar level, 12 kids were on the team. So we had grown the number of kids who could make a higher standard by creating a lower standard, essentially, but something that was reachable and something that they could take as a step in progression on their way. And I think that kind of stuff, I know we've also talked here about a non-focus on, for instance, swimmers and parents and coaches, everybody being on cut times, but creating enough opportunity that there's something at the end of a season, end of a year, that's sort of reachable and appropriate and exciting for the swimmers to compete in, I think makes a huge difference. All right, next time on the Swim Brief, 5 things, maybe 6 things, maybe only 4 things I don't think we're going to do 4 things. I think it'll be probably 5 or more that you can
25 things.
25. The 25 most important things you can control. And if you don't, you're a horrible swim coach. We'll have that next time on the podcast. Thank you to JB and GB for joining me. Thank you to everybody for listening.